There are battles that no one sees, wars that happen in silence, inside the mind, inside the body, inside the soul. And maybe that is exactly where you are right now, smiling on the outside, functioning normally, talking to people as if everything is fine, while internally you are fighting a desire that seems stronger than your own will, a desire that appears in vulnerable moments, late at night, early in the morning, during loneliness, during emotional exhaustion, during those moments when your soul feels empty and your flesh starts screaming for relief. And what hurts the most is not even the temptation itself. It is the guilt that comes after it. The feeling that maybe you are too broken to be used by God. The fear that perhaps your struggle disqualifies you from your calling. But what if I told you that some of the people most chosen by heaven also face the deepest internal wars? What if this battle is not proof that God abandoned you, but proof that something spiritual is being formed inside you? There is a reason why the enemy attacks the area of desire so intensely. Because sexual desire is connected to identity, intimacy, vulnerability, emotional hunger, and spiritual authority. The enemy rarely wastes energy on people who already surrendered to darkness. But when someone carries purpose, when someone carries spiritual sensitivity, when someone was marked for something greater, the attacks become strategic. That is why so many chosen people live with hidden battles nobody knows about. On the outside, they look calm, but internally, there is tension between spirit and flesh every single day. One side wants holiness, the other side wants escape. One side wants peace, the other side wants instant relief. And the most exhausting part is feeling trapped between both worlds, as if you are constantly disappointing God, no matter how hard you try. But listen carefully to this truth. God is not shocked by your humanity. He already knew every weakness you would have before He called you. He knew every temptation you would face before He separated you. And still, He chose you. The enemy wants you to believe your struggle means you are dirty. God wants you to understand your struggle means you are alive spiritually. Because dead souls do not fight temptation. Dead souls surrender without resistance. The fact that you feel conviction, pain, inner conflict, and the desire to change is already evidence that something holy still lives inside you. The battle itself reveals that your spirit refuses to completely surrender. And if this message is already speaking directly to your soul, leave a like on this video and write in the comments, "I'm still fighting." Sometimes the strongest people are the ones fighting silent battles nobody sees. And your comment may remind someone else that they are not alone in this war. Many chosen ones are naturally intense people. They feel deeply. They love deeply. They absorb emotions deeply. They notice energies, atmospheres, and emotional shifts other people ignore. And because of this sensitivity, temptation also feels stronger. A memory affects them more deeply. A look affects them more deeply. Loneliness affects them more deeply. Rejection affects them more deeply. The enemy studies this emotional intensity and tries to transform it into weakness. He turns emotional hunger into lust. He turns loneliness into addiction. He turns stress into secret habits. He turns the need for affection into destructive cycles. And suddenly, the chosen one begins living in shame, believing they are spiritually failing, when in reality, they are spiritually wounded. Some people were exposed to things too early. Some experienced emotional abandonment. Some grew up without affection. Some learned to use pleasure as anesthesia for pain. And now, years later, they think the issue is only sexual desire, when actually the deeper issue is emotional starvation. Sometimes lust is not even about pleasure. Sometimes it is about escape. Escape from pressure. Escape from sadness. Escape from emptiness. Escape from feeling unwanted. And the enemy knows this. He knows that exhausted souls become vulnerable souls, that isolated hearts become easier targets, that people who secretly hate themselves are easier to trap in cycles of self-destruction. That is why isolation is one of the greatest weapons used against the chosen. The enemy wants you alone with your thoughts, alone with your guilt, alone with your shame. Because isolation magnifies temptation. And the dangerous thing about hidden struggles is that they grow stronger in darkness. The longer you suffer in silence, the more you begin believing the lie that nobody understands you. But heaven understands. God understands. He sees the nights nobody else sees. He sees the prayers you whisper after falling again. He sees the moments you cry, asking Him why this battle feels so heavy. And contrary to what shame tells you, God has not walked away from you. The Bible is full of people who carried calling while fighting human weakness. David was chosen, yet he struggled with desire. Samson was anointed, yet he was vulnerable emotionally. Peter loved Jesus deeply, yet still failed under pressure. Even Paul described the internal war between flesh and spirit. Why? Because being chosen does not mean becoming emotionless. It means learning how to surrender your weakness to God instead of allowing your weakness to define your identity. And that process takes time, sometimes painful time. The enemy wants you to identify yourself by your worst moments. God identifies you by your purpose. The enemy calls you slave. God calls you son. The enemy says you are too impure to be used. God says He specializes in restoring broken people. That is why this battle is deeper than simple temptation. It is an attack against your identity. Because if the enemy can convince you that you are hopeless, he can stop you from becoming who you were created to be. And maybe lately you have felt exhausted from fighting. Maybe you are tired of promising yourself you will change only to fall again. Maybe you are tired of feeling spiritually weak every time temptation wins another battle. But hear this carefully. Your story is not over because you stumbled. Falling is not the same as surrendering. A person who still cries, still seeks God, still desires transformation is not abandoned. They are under construction. Sometimes God allows the battle because the battle itself is shaping you, teaching dependence, teaching discipline, teaching spiritual maturity, teaching you that real strength does not come from pretending temptation does not exist. Real strength comes from learning how to run back to God even after failure. The chosen are not people who never struggle. The chosen are people who keep getting back up. And maybe that's exactly why so many people stay trapped, because they keep fighting the fall, but never learn how the battle actually begins inside the mind. That's one of the reasons I created Before You Fall, a complete guide for people who are tired of living in silent cycles of temptation, guilt, and spiritual exhaustion, not just to resist desire, but to regain control before the fall even happens. The download link is in the description or in the first pinned comment. And perhaps this entire war happening inside you right now is preparing you for a level of spiritual authority you cannot yet understand. Because one day, your wounds will become wisdom for someone else. One day, your testimony will free people who currently feel trapped exactly the way you feel now. One day, the very area that caused you shame will become proof of God's restoration in your life. But before healing becomes visible, there is usually a hidden season of war. And maybe that is the season you are in right now. There are moments when temptation does not arrive loudly. It comes softly, quietly, patiently. It waits for the exact moment when your soul is tired, when your emotions are unstable, when your heart feels rejected, when your mind is overloaded. That is when the battlefield becomes dangerous. Because most chosen people do not fall when they are spiritually alert. They fall when they are emotionally exhausted. And maybe nobody ever explained this to you before, but emotional exhaustion can become a spiritual doorway. When the soul is wounded, the flesh begins searching for immediate comfort. That is why so many people mistake spiritual warfare for simple lack of discipline. But some battles are deeper than discipline. Some battles involve emotional scars that were never healed. Some people carry years of silent pain hidden behind smiles, routines, and normal conversations. Yet inside, there is a desperate hunger for relief. The enemy studies this hunger carefully. He notices what makes you feel empty. He notices what makes you feel unwanted. He notices the nights when loneliness becomes unbearable. He notices the moments when your mind becomes vulnerable. And then he sends temptation dressed as comfort. That is why desire often feels strongest during isolation, because isolation weakens discernment. When someone feels disconnected emotionally, they become more vulnerable spiritually. This is why so many chosen people secretly battle cycles they hate, cycles they pray against, cycles they promise to leave behind, only to revisit again during moments of weakness. And after every failure comes the same voice: you will never change. But that voice is not from God. God convicts, but Satan condemns. God corrects, but Satan humiliates. God restores, but Satan labels. The enemy wants you trapped in shame, because shame keeps people hidden, and hidden wounds rarely heal. The longer you hide your struggle, the heavier it becomes. Shame convinces people they are uniquely broken, when in reality, millions of souls are fighting similar silent wars every day. Especially chosen ones, because chosen people often carry unusual sensitivity. They absorb atmospheres. They feel emotions intensely. They perceive spiritual pressure deeply. They struggle with overthinking. They replay memories repeatedly. They feel spiritual heaviness stronger than others. And if this sensitivity is not surrendered to God, it becomes overwhelming. The same depth that allows someone to connect spiritually can also become the reason temptation feels overpowering. A simple image becomes difficult to forget. A simple memory becomes emotionally consuming. A moment of weakness becomes a mental storm. And slowly, the chosen one begins feeling trapped inside their own mind. But listen carefully. Sensitivity is not weakness. It is unmanaged depth. Some of the greatest prophets in Scripture were deeply emotional people. Elijah became emotionally exhausted after spiritual victory. David wrote psalms from places of brokenness, loneliness, fear, and desire. Jeremiah cried openly before God. Even Jesus experienced anguish in Gethsemane so intense that his body reacted physically to the pressure. Spiritual people often feel life more deeply than others, and that emotional depth can either become spiritual power or spiritual vulnerability, depending on where it is surrendered. The enemy knows that if he cannot destroy your calling directly, he will try to exhaust your soul instead. Because exhausted people stop resisting. Exhausted people isolate themselves. Exhausted people lose clarity. Exhausted people seek quick comfort. And this generation lives surrounded by instant stimulation. Everything is designed to feed impulse. Everything is sexualized. Everything is accessible in seconds. The enemy no longer needs to send temptation physically when temptation lives inside phones, screens, memories, fantasies, and emotional triggers constantly surrounding people every day. That is why spiritual discipline has become more necessary than ever before. Not because desire itself is evil, but because uncontrolled desire eventually controls the soul. And this is where many chosen people become confused. They start hating themselves for feeling desire at all. But desire was created by God. The problem is not desire. The problem is when desire becomes disconnected from purpose. Fire inside a fireplace brings warmth. Fire outside its place destroys everything around it. In the same way, desire outside spiritual alignment creates chaos internally. The enemy wants the chosen one to live controlled by impulse instead of guided by purpose. Because a person controlled by impulse struggles to hear God clearly. A person controlled by shame struggles to pray freely. A person trapped in addiction struggles to see their own value. And slowly, identity becomes distorted. That is the true goal of spiritual warfare. Identity confusion. The enemy knows that once someone forgets who they are spiritually, they become easier to manipulate emotionally. That is why temptation often attacks right after moments of spiritual growth. Have you noticed that? Sometimes after prayer, fasting, worship, or spiritual breakthroughs, temptation suddenly increases. Thoughts become stronger. Urges become louder. Emotional heaviness becomes intense. That is not coincidence. The enemy attacks hardest when he senses spiritual movement. He knows you are getting closer to freedom. He knows chains are weakening. He knows healing is beginning. He knows your mind is awakening. So he increases pressure, hoping you will quit before transformation fully happens. Many people think spiritual warfare means hearing strange voices or seeing supernatural manifestations. But often spiritual warfare looks much simpler. It looks like trying to pray while your mind is full of temptation. It looks like wanting holiness while fighting secret habits. It looks like crying after another night you promised yourself would be different. It looks like exhaustion from battling thoughts nobody else sees. And the hardest part is that chosen people usually hold themselves to impossible standards. They expect perfection from themselves immediately. So when they fail, they collapse emotionally. They begin questioning whether God still loves them, whether they are still chosen, whether they still have purpose. But hear this carefully. God already knew every weakness you would battle before He called you. Nothing about your struggle surprised heaven. God is not standing over you, waiting to reject you after every failure. He is standing beside you, trying to rebuild you through the process. The enemy wants immediate condemnation. God works through restoration, and restoration rarely happens overnight. Sometimes God heals instantly. Sometimes He heals gradually. Sometimes He allows the battle to continue, because the battle itself develops spiritual maturity, because there are lessons learned in warfare that comfort alone could never teach. The chosen are often shaped through resistance, through surrender, through hidden tears, through private battles nobody applauds. And maybe that is why your current season feels so heavy. Because God is building endurance inside you, not fake holiness, real transformation, the kind that happens slowly, quietly, painfully, deep inside the soul. And even though you may feel weak right now, something important is happening internally. Every time you resist temptation, even briefly, strength is being developed. Every time you return to God after failure instead of abandoning Him completely, spiritual maturity is growing. Every time you choose prayer over impulse, even imperfectly, chains weaken little by little. Freedom rarely begins with perfection. Freedom begins with persistence. And maybe tonight, instead of hating yourself for struggling, you need to recognize something deeper. The fact that you are still fighting means your spirit has not surrendered. The truth is, many chosen people spend years fighting symptoms while ignoring the deeper wound underneath. They try to control behavior without healing the soul. They try to silence temptation without understanding the pain feeding it. And because of that, the cycle continues. Fall, guilt, prayer, temporary strength. Another fall, more shame, more isolation, more exhaustion. But God never intended for you to live trapped in endless condemnation. There are hidden wounds inside many people that became open doors over time. Childhood rejection, emotional neglect, exposure to impurity too early, traumatic experiences, abandonment, loneliness, the absence of affection. Sometimes the body searches for pleasure because the soul never learned how to feel safe. Sometimes desire grows stronger in people who secretly feel unloved. And the enemy uses these emotional fractures like entry points. This is why healing is not only spiritual, it is emotional too. God does not merely want to change your actions, He wants to restore your identity. Because when identity heals, behavior slowly follows. The enemy wants you focused only on your failures, so you never investigate your wounds. But heaven wants to expose the root, not just the fruit. That is why some people pray for years against temptation, but never confront the loneliness, insecurity, rejection, or emotional starvation hidden underneath it all. And until the root is addressed, the cycle keeps finding ways to return. The chosen often carry deep emotional intensity because they were created with deep spiritual capacity. The problem is that unhealed depth becomes dangerous. A wounded soul searches for relief everywhere, sometimes in relationship, sometimes in fantasy, sometimes in attention, sometimes in secret addictions, sometimes in people who were never meant to have access to your heart. And slowly, the chosen one begins confusing temporary pleasure with genuine healing. But temporary pleasure cannot heal eternal wounds. It only distracts for moments. Then comes emptiness again, then guilt again, then emotional heaviness again. And eventually, the soul becomes tired of pretending. Maybe that is why this message found you now. Because deep inside, you are exhausted from fighting alone. You are tired of acting spiritually strong while privately feeling weak. Tired of asking God for forgiveness over the same battles. Tired of wondering why freedom feels so far away. But freedom is not impossible for you. And listen carefully. God is not disgusted by your struggle. Religious people may judge you. People may misunderstand you. Some may reduce your battle to simple weakness. But God sees deeper than behavior. He sees the wound. He sees the trauma. He sees the emotional hunger. He sees the nights you cry silently. He sees the moments you genuinely want change, but feel trapped inside patterns stronger than your current strength. And even now, He has not abandoned you. Some of the strongest spiritual people in history walked through hidden seasons of intense internal warfare. The difference is that many people only celebrate the public victory while ignoring the private breaking process that came before it. Nobody sees the hidden nights, the tears, the isolation, the mental battles, the moments of feeling spiritually exhausted. But heaven sees all of it, and perhaps your current season is not punishment, perhaps it is preparation. Because God often breaks pride before releasing purpose. He teaches dependence before authority. He develops discipline before elevation. The chosen are not built through comfort. They are built through fire. And fire reveals everything hidden. That is why your struggle became impossible to ignore. God is exposing areas that must heal before your next season begins, not to shame you, but to free you. Because whatever stays hidden keeps growing stronger. But whatever is brought into God's light can finally begin healing. You do not need to pretend anymore. You do not need fake perfection. You need surrender. That is where transformation truly begins. Not when someone becomes flawless overnight, but when someone finally becomes honest before God. Many people keep trying to appear holy externally while internally collapsing emotionally. But God is not looking for performance. He is looking for truth, real surrender, real dependence, real vulnerability. Because the strongest prayers are not always eloquent prayers. Sometimes the strongest prayer is simply, God, I'm tired. I need help. And maybe that is the prayer heaven has been waiting to hear from you. Not polished religion, not fake strength, not spiritual performance. Just honesty, because healing begins where pretending ends. The enemy fears honest surrender more than fake perfection. Why? Because honest surrender invites God into the deepest parts of the soul. And once God enters those hidden places, chains begin breaking slowly. Not instantly, every time, but truly. There is also something important you must understand. Temptation itself is not sin. Even Jesus was tempted in the wilderness. The presence of temptation does not mean God left you. It means you are human living in spiritual warfare. The real question is not whether temptation exists. The real question is who gains authority over your decisions. And authority is built daily. Small choices matter. Private choices matter. What you feed mentally matters. What environments you stay in matters. Who you allow near your emotions matters. Because spiritual weakness rarely appears suddenly. It usually grows through repeated compromise, emotional exhaustion, isolation, and lack of spiritual protection over time. That is why healing requires intentionality. Not only prayer, but also wisdom, boundaries, discipline, accountability, emotional healing. Renewing the mind. God heals spiritually, but He also teaches responsibility. And slowly, as your mind heals, your desires begin losing some of their power over you. Not because desire disappears completely, but because purpose starts becoming stronger than impulse. That is real maturity, not the absence of temptation, but learning not to be controlled by it anymore. And one of the greatest signs that God is transforming someone is not perfection. It is persistence, the refusal to quit, the refusal to fully surrender to darkness, the decision to keep returning to God no matter how many times the battle becomes exhausting, because the chosen fall sometimes, but they do not belong to the darkness they fight against. Deep inside, something keeps pulling them back toward God. And maybe that pull you still feel, even after everything, is proof that heaven is still calling your name. And maybe one of the biggest reasons people stay trapped is because they never understand what is really feeding the battle inside them. Sometimes the problem is deeper than temptation itself. That's why I left a complete material in the comments for those who are tired of fighting the same cycles silently and want to start rebuilding their mind, their discipline, and their spiritual strength little by little. Maybe for a long time you believed this battle was proof that you were far from God. But what if the opposite is true? What if the reason you feel this internal conflict so intensely is because your spirit refuses to fully belong to the darkness trying to pull you down? People who are spiritually asleep rarely fight this hard. The struggle itself reveals that something alive still exists inside you, something holy, something chosen, something heaven refuses to give up on. And this is where many people misunderstand the process of transformation. They think spiritual growth happens instantly. They expect one prayer to erase every weakness overnight. But often God transforms people progressively, layer by layer, wound by wound, season by season. Because He is not merely trying to change your habits. He is rebuilding your entire identity from the inside out. That takes time, sometimes painful time, because God will often allow hidden things to surface before He heals them completely. Not to humiliate you, but to expose what has been controlling you in secret. You cannot heal what you continue hiding. And maybe this season has forced you to confront parts of yourself you spent years avoiding. The loneliness, the emotional dependency, the hidden anger, the insecurity, the fear of rejection, the secret need for validation, the wounds nobody ever noticed. Sometimes sexual temptation is not even about physical desire anymore. Sometimes it becomes emotional medication, a temporary escape from internal emptiness, a brief moment where pain goes silent. But afterward, the emptiness always returns stronger, because nothing temporary can heal what only God can restore permanently. And deep down, you already know that. That is why, after every moment of compromise, your spirit still aches for God. That ache is important. Do not ignore it. It is evidence that your soul still belongs to Him. The enemy wants you numb, completely disconnected, completely surrendered to darkness. But the fact that conviction still touches your heart means heaven is still fighting for you. You are not abandoned. You are being rebuilt. There are people watching this right now who secretly feel exhausted from pretending to be okay, exhausted from carrying hidden guilt, exhausted from asking God the same questions over and over again. Why am I still fighting this? Why does this temptation keep returning? Why do I feel weak in the very area I want freedom the most? But maybe the question is not simply why temptation exists. Maybe the deeper question is, what is God producing inside you through the battle? Because every war develops something. Some wars develop bitterness. Some develop fear. But spiritual wars, when surrendered to God, develop authority. The battles you survive become the areas where you eventually carry wisdom, discernment, compassion, and strength. One day, you will speak to people trapped in the same darkness you once cried through privately. One day, your testimony will become proof that restoration is possible. One day you will realize that the very area Satan tried hardest to destroy became the place where God revealed His grace most powerfully. That is why you cannot quit now. You are closer to breakthrough than you realize. The enemy attacks hardest before chains break, before minds awaken, before identities heal, before purpose activates. And maybe lately, the warfare intensified because something in you is changing spiritually. Maybe heaven is preparing you for a new level of maturity, discipline, and intimacy with God. The enemy senses movement before you do sometimes. That is why attacks suddenly increase when someone starts praying more deeply, seeking God more sincerely, or taking spiritual growth seriously. Hell reacts when people begin waking up. But listen carefully. Temptation does not define you. Your worst night does not define you. Your hidden struggle does not define you. Your moments of weakness do not erase your calling. God knew every chapter of your story before writing your purpose into existence. And despite everything, He still chose you. Not because you were perfect, not because you never struggled, but because He saw who you could become after healing. You are not fighting alone. Even now, while watching this, God sees the parts of your heart nobody else understands. He sees your exhaustion, your frustration, your desire to change, your fear of failing again. And instead of turning away from you, He keeps calling you closer. That is grace. Not permission to stay trapped, but power to keep getting back up. Because real transformation is not built on flawless performance, it is built on continual surrender, returning to God again and again until your spirit becomes stronger than the chains that once controlled you. And yes, there will still be difficult nights. There will still be moments of weakness. There will still be battles. But every time you choose not to quit, every time you pray instead of completely surrendering, every time you return to God after failure instead of running from Him, you weaken darkness little by little. Freedom is often built through repeated surrender. And one day, you will look back at this season and realize something incredible. The battle that almost broke you was actually building you, building discernment, building discipline, building spiritual depth, building compassion for others, building dependence on God instead of dependence on temporary pleasure. The chosen are forged privately before they are revealed publicly. That is why your hidden season matters so much. God is shaping you where nobody sees, in the silence, in the tears, in the internal wars, in the moments where you feel weakest. And when the process is complete, the same person who once cried in secret will carry authority that cannot be faked. So if you are still fighting, if you still desire God, even after all the battles, if your soul still longs for freedom, then do not believe the lie that your story is over. This is not the end of your journey. This is the middle of your transformation. And the fact that you are still here, still listening, still hoping, still searching for God, is proof that heaven has not given up on you yet. If this video touched something deep inside you, don't leave without doing this. Write in the comments, "My fight has purpose." Let that be your declaration tonight. Not shame, not defeat, purpose. Because God is not finished with you yet. And if you want more messages that strengthen your spirit, expose the hidden battles of the chosen, and help you get closer to God in the middle of the war, subscribe to the channel now and turn on the notification bell. You are not weak for fighting. You are being shaped for something greater.